Kano didn't bark. He just lunged, snow flying as his paws slammed toward the fallen log. Zeke and Nash followed, tense and silent. Behind them, Jamal tightened his grip on Ava's hand. "Something's there," she whispered. The wind howled through the Oregon pines as they reached the spot and saw it. Small, bloodied, barely breathing. A wild creature, but the dogs didn't growl. They circled it, guarding. That moment changed everything. What they saved wasn't just an animal. It would become something no one could explain. Like stories with heart and edge, hit subscribe, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done? The Montana sky was bruised violet, thick clouds drifting like slow ghosts over the peaks. The air was sharp, knifing through jackets and breath alike. Snow was falling again, dry, powdered flakes that danced sideways in the wind. Jamal Rivers tightened his grip on the sled handle as he navigated the narrow trail that curved through the pine grove. Behind him, the crunch of snow marked the steps of 3 shepherds, Kano, Nash, and little Zeke. But it wasn't the dogs he kept checking on. It was Ava, 10 years old, legally blind since birth, wrapped in a parka 2 sizes too big, and walking as if she could see the world clearer than anyone. "You good, baby girl?" Jamal called, voice muffled beneath his scarf. "I'm listening," Ava answered, slowing as her hand drifted outward, fingers brushing pine needles she couldn't see. Jamal smiled, though worry tugged at the corners of his eyes. They were late. The storm had moved faster than forecasted. He'd only meant to let the dogs run a bit before the next cold front hit, but here they were, a mile from home, dusk bleeding into the woods. Suddenly, Kano stopped dead in his tracks, the big German shepherd's ears pinned forward, hackles just beginning to rise. Nash followed suit a second later, tail stiff and body rigid. Zeke whined, confused, shifting in place like he felt something invisible pass through him. Jamal frowned. "What is it?" But before he could finish the question, Ava turned sharply to her left. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she dropped to one knee with a surprised gasp. "Wait," she said, her head tilted slightly. "There's something here." Jamal was by her side in an instant, brushing snow away from the drift she was kneeling over. At first he saw nothing, just a lump in the snow, then a flicker of fur. It was small, barely the size of a house cat. A kitten? No, wild. Jamal's heart tightened as he realized what he was looking at. A bobcat cub, maybe 8 weeks old, its spotted fur stained red, sides rising shallowly. The eyes clouded and dull blue, opened just barely before closing again in a slow blink of pain. "Oh damn," Jamal whispered. He glanced around quickly, instincts kicking. In pats in a smear of blood, broken tree limbs, and there, glinting under a thin sheath of snow, steel jaws. A snare. He exhaled shakily. Some asshole set a trap out here. Ava reached forward, hand trembling slightly. "It's breathing, I can feel it." Kano stepped forward now, tail low but not tucked, ears perked but not hostile. Jamal expected a growl, maybe even a warning nip. Wildcats and dogs didn't mix. But instead, Kano did something else. Something strange. The big shepherd leaned down slowly, and with a gentleness that didn't belong to instinct, he licked the kitten's forehead once. Then again. Zeke let out a puzzled chirp and wagged his tail, still unsure. Nash sat down next to Ava, watching in silent attention. Jamal. The cold pressed in from all sides now. The storm would be on them within the hour, and that cub echo, the name came suddenly without thinking, wasn't going to survive out here. Not in its state. "I know the rules," he muttered to himself. "Don't interfere with wildlife, let nature run its course." But this wasn't nature. This was a steel trap. This was blood and pain and human negligence. He looked down at Ava, whose face had tilted toward him as if reading the decision forming in his head. "You can't leave it," she said softly. "No," Jamal answered, already pulling off his gloves. "No, we can't." He scooped the tiny body gently into his arms. It didn't resist, didn't even flinch, just let out a ragged sigh, like it had been waiting for this moment, either death or a miracle. Kano followed close, pressed against his side, and for the first time in years, Jamal felt something strange stir in the air, like balance being restored. They trudged back through deepening snow, wind howling louder than before. Jamal didn't speak. Ava walked ahead, hand brushing Nash's back for guidance, face serene as if she were leading them through light instead of blizzard. The little house emerged in the distance, warm light glowing faintly behind frosted windows. The dogs broke into a lope, and Jamal's arms tightened around Echo. This was a bad idea, a dangerous one. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt like the beginning. The wind screamed outside the cabin, rattling the windows like ghost fingers trying to claw their way inside. The snowstorm that had chased them home had become a whiteout by midnight, burying the world in silence and shadow. Inside, the small living room was dimly lit by the flickering glow of a dying fire. The smell of damp fur and melted snow clung to the air. Jamal sat in a chair pulled close to the fireplace, hunched forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped in front of him. His eyes stayed locked on the small cardboard box nestled between two thick wool blankets. Inside it, wrapped like a fragile ember, was the Bobcat cub, Echo. Its breathing was shallow but rhythmic, the rise and fall of its thin chest like the flutter of a leaf about to drop. Beside the box, Kano lay with his head on his paws, ears twitching at every shift of wind, eyes half closed but watchful. Nash was curled up at the base of the couch, old and quiet, occasionally letting out a soft grunt in his sleep. Zeke paced near the kitchen, restless, tail flicking, not sure how to process what had invaded his space. Rebecca, Jamal's sister-in-law, stood in the kitchen doorway in a fleece robe, her dark curls tied back and her brow furrowed. She was a veterinarian, used to broken things, strays, wounds, trauma. But this was different. This was wild. She had examined Echo earlier, noting the low temperature, shallow pulse, and signs of minor internal trauma. "It won't make it through the night," she'd said quietly, not unkindly, just honest. And yet, something about the way the cub had curled toward Ava's touch, something about Kano's silent vigil beside it, had kept her from suggesting they put it down. Now, hours later, she was back in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the same miracle Jamal couldn't stop staring at. At some point past 3 a.m., Jamal nodded off in the chair. When he awoke, it was from the sound of movement, a shuffle, a breath, something faint but distinct. He blinked the sleep from his eyes and looked toward the box. It was empty. Heart hammering, he stood, scanning the room. Then he saw, there in the center of the rug in front of the fireplace, lay a strange formation. 3 dogs, one in each compass direction, and in the middle, nestled into their warmth, lay Echo, head resting on Kano's front leg. Zeke, surprisingly, was among them, though his ears were tilted back in a tension that hadn't quite dissolved. Nash was fully relaxed, his breath slow and deep, and Kano looked like a lion, massive and still, eyes closed, body curved protectively around the small creature. It was a circle, a pack. Jamal froze, struck by the quiet enormity of what he was seeing. This was not training. This wasn't behavior you taught a dog in obedience school. This was instinct rewritten, territory abandoned, trust extended, pack rules bent until they broke. Echo's fur twitched slightly as it exhaled, then shifted deeper into Kano's side. He heard a floorboard creak behind him. Ava had crept into the room, barefoot, hair wild from sleep, one hand on the wall for balance, the other outstretched in front of her. "Is it gone?" she whispered. "No," Jamal answered. "It's here, it's alive." She smiled and tilted her head as if listening for Echo's breath. By morning, the storm had not let up, and power had flickered out completely. The house was running on the wood stove, propane, and the patience of creatures waiting for something to shift. Rebecca placed a bowl of warmed goat milk on a towel and watched as Echo sniffed at it cautiously. It had not eaten yet. That worried her, but its limbs seemed stronger, its head more alert. Then came the snap, the shift, the reminder. Later that evening, Jamal tried to feed the dogs in their usual order. Kano, Nash, then Zeke. He placed 3 bowls down across the kitchen floor, then brought a smaller bowl for Echo, lined with mushy venison scraps, soft enough for its teeth to manage. The moment he placed it down, Echo moved toward it, slow and cautious, still limping slightly. Zeke moved faster. It happened in a blink. A growl not deep like Kano's, but sharp, high, impulsive. Zeke lunged for the bowl and Echo instinctively backed up. But the young cub wasn't quick enough. Zeke snapped forward and caught Echo's ear in his teeth, shaking once before Jamal's shout shattered the room. The little shepherd dropped back, tail between his legs, but unrepentant. Echo cried out, a thin yelp that sounded more feline than canine, and blood began to bead along the edge of its ear. Kano moved then, not to attack but to insert himself. He walked slowly between Zeke and Echo, pressing his body into Zeke's path until the younger dog backed off. Then, with almost no sound, he lowered his head and licked Echo's wound. Ava stood in the hallway, face pale. He didn't mean to hurt it, she said softly, though her voice trembled. Jamal didn't answer. He crouched beside Echo, gently cupping its head as he checked the wound. It was shallow, but it told a deeper story. This wasn't just survival. This was tension, disruption. Echo was still an intruder, still prey in the eyes of one of their own. That night, when the family went to bed, Echo didn't curl between the dogs like before. It lay in the far corner of the living room, ears twitching, eyes half closed but never fully resting. Zeke watched from his usual spot at the foot of the stairs, tail wrapped around his paws, ears still tilted in discomfort. Nash had already drifted to sleep, and Kano still, watching. Outside, the snow finally stopped, but the world wasn't calm yet. Something had shifted, and the house, though warm, no longer felt entirely at peace. The days that followed the incident with Zeke were filled with an uneasy quiet, like the house itself had inhaled sharply and was still waiting to exhale. The snow outside had softened into glistening white hills, but the air remained bitter and still. Jamal spent most mornings chopping wood in silence, his breath visible in puffs, while Ava sat near the window wrapped in a thick blanket, her fingers running across the ridges of her braille reader. Though she hadn't touched the story in days, she listened instead to footsteps, to the hush of fur brushing tile, to the rhythm of animals breathing. Something was changing in Echo, something she couldn't explain but could feel in her chest like a second heartbeat. Inside the cabin, Echo moved differently now, no longer slinking like a feral creature. The Bobcat's gait had started to mimic that of Kano, slow, poised, deliberate. At first, Jamal thought it was coincidence, a mimicry born of proximity. But one afternoon, he watched from the hallway as Kano rose from his spot by the door and padded toward the back window. Echo, curled nearby, opened one eye and immediately sat up. Its paws followed in perfect synchrony, tail low but alert, every step aligned to Kano's as though they shared the same nervous system. When Kano sat, Echo sat. When Kano scanned the tree line through the glass, Echo's head tilted the same direction, ears flicking in tandem. And then came the sound, soft, guttural, unmistakable. Not a meow, not a hiss. It was a bark, or something close. A stunted, awkward sound somewhere between a growl and a short exhale. Rising against the wall, stunned. "You're kidding me," he whispered to himself. "You're trying to bark." Echo didn't respond, but Kano's ears twitched slightly, as if amused. The pattern repeated in strange, haunting ways. Each evening, as Jamal secured the doors and checked the generator, Kano would position himself at the front of the cabin, standing perfectly still like a sentinel. A few feet behind him, Echo would do the same, body tensed, tail twitching, eyes fixed ahead. If a branch snapped in the distance or the wind whistled wrong through the trees, Kano would growl low, almost inaudibly, and Echo would mirror the sound seconds later. It was eerie, it was beautiful, it was impossible. Nash didn't pay much mind, age had dulled his curiosity. Zeke, still uneasy, kept to himself, watching from corners and refusing to sleep near Echo, even though the cub never approached. But Ava saw everything in the dark. One night, a storm rolled in again. It was different this time, not a blizzard but a thunderstorm rare in that season. The crack of lightning split the sky open above the valley, followed by a rumble that shook the cabin walls. Ava, asleep in her room, jolted upright in a silent panic. Her hands searched for her cane, her mouth open but voiceless. Her world had no visual orientation, and when her senses were overwhelmed, panic came fast. She gasped, choking on air that suddenly felt thick. Her heart pounded in her ears, faster than thunder. Across the house, Echo's head snapped up. It was lying near the fireplace, curled beside Kano. Its ears pricked, eyes darting toward the hallway as if drawn by a signal too subtle for human detection. Then it bolted. It reached Ava's door and scratched once, twice, claws light but urgent. No answer. Then a second scratch, longer, more persistent. From inside, Ava sobbed quietly, curled near the bedpost. Echo stood on its hind legs and pressed against the handle with both front paws. It didn't know how to open doors, but it knew she was in there. Jamal, coming out of the kitchen with a mug of tea, saw the shape at Ava's door and felt fear spike for half a second. But Echo didn't move like a predator. It moved like something worried, something waiting for permission. He opened the door. Ava turned sharply at the sound, face pale, body shaking. Echo slipped inside before Jamal could speak. It padded silently across the carpet and lay down right beside her, pressing its body against her hip. Not too close, not demanding, just present. Ava exhaled slowly, one hand drifting down until her fingers brushed the thick fur along Echo's back. She didn't say a word, but her trembling lessened. Her shoulders dropped an inch. She curled toward the Bobcat and lay her head beside its flank. Echo didn't move for the rest of the night. It stayed there, breathing with her, pulse sinking as if they'd known each other in another life. When Jamal checked on them an hour later, he found them both asleep, Ava's hand resting on Echo's chest. It rose and fell steadily. The next morning, Ava said something that made Jamal stop mid-step. "He knew I was afraid," she whispered over breakfast. "He came for me." But Jamal nodded slowly, unsure of how to explain something that didn't need explaining. After that, Echo began appearing outside Ava's room every night. From times it stayed for only a few minutes. Other times it curled near the door until dawn. The other dogs left it alone. Even Zeke stopped growling. He didn't like Echo, but he'd stopped challenging it, as if conceding some silent shift in hierarchy. Echo was still young, still unsure, but under Kanyo's gaze it learned how to move like a dog, to listen like one, to watch the horizon as if something out there belonged to it. When Ava laughed, Echo's ears perked. When she cried, Echo stayed near. It was no longer just survival. It was connection, something raw, something sacred. And though Echo still didn't bark right, didn't walk exactly like a dog, and couldn't fully shake the feline twitch in its tail, there was no denying it. The cub was trying, and maybe, just maybe, it was becoming. Spring came late to the valley that year, its arrival subtle and cautious like a traveler unsure if it was welcome. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth, broken branches, and the scattered bones of last season's silence. The river's cabin stood quiet against the shifting sky, weathered but strong, just like the family inside. Ava had begun venturing further from the porch, her steps guided by the familiar rhythm of Nash's tail swishing ahead and Echo's padded footsteps never more than a foot away. Jamal watched from a distance, unsure which unsettled him more, that his daughter was learning independence in the arms of wildness, or that the wildness itself had become. Every night it returned to Ava's door like a guardian no one assigned. And yet, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that peace was too quiet, too perfect. Something had to shift. It always did. The day it happened began like any other. Ava was drawing on the porch with charcoal, her fingers smudged with soft black streaks, the paper under her hand textured and folded at the corners. Echo lay beside her, little flicking now and then, eyes scanning the woods. Zeke and Nash lounged in the sun, and Kano patrolled the outer edge of the yard in steady, even loops. No barking, no alarm, until the boy appeared. Benji Keller, 15, wiry and twitchy, with a hoodie too big and a voice always two-toned. He'd visited the property before his parents owned the rundown trailer half a mile down the gravel road. Jamal didn't trust him. The boy always asked strange questions about the animals, especially Echo. He laughed too easily when Ava stumbled, stared too long at the shed where the hunting gear was kept. Jamal had warned him to stay back, but kids like Benji didn't listen. That day he came without invitation. He rode his bike to the edge of the drive and walked the rest of the way, moving quietly until he was right at the fence. Ava didn't hear him at first. Echo did. The Bobcat rose slowly, its body low, tail straight behind it, muscles coiled but not aggressive alert. Benji called out a name, maybe hers, maybe not, and Ava turned, her charcoal dropping from her hand. She smiled politely. He stepped closer, hands in his hoodie pocket, face split in what might have been a grin or a grimace. Then he reached out fast. Echo leapt, The sound was a snarl torn from somewhere primal, sharp and furious. Eva screamed. The next moment unfolded in fragments. Benji on the ground yelling, Echo over him, teeth bared, blood dripping from its jaw. Jamal sprinted from the barn, his boots heavy on the ground, shouting before he even reached them. By the time he pulled Echo away, Benji's arm was torn, his hoodie slashed, and his face pale with something between pain and panic. Just attacked me, he screamed, pointing. That thing's crazy. Ava was shaking, curled into herself, hands over her ears. Echo stood still now, not growling, not moving, just watching, its sides heaving. Jamal took a long breath. What happened? He asked. But Benji was already dialing his phone, already crying into the speaker about being mauled by a wild animal. Within an hour, 2 police cruisers and a white truck from the local ranger station pulled up the drive. The name on the door, Martinez. Ranger Miguel Martinez stepped out with a clipboard, his jaw tight. Jamal knew him. Everyone did. Fair man by most accounts. But orders were orders. We had a call about an aggressive bobcat, Martinez said, eyes scanning the property. I'm under directive from Wildlife Management to investigate possession of an unlicensed wild animal. You know how serious this is? Jamal nodded once, biting down the response building in his throat. He opened the front gate slowly. Martinez stepped inside. Where is it? Echo was already standing behind Ava, who sat now on the porch step, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. The bobcat did not run, did not hide. Martinez stopped short. It knows us. And it didn't attack that boy out of nowhere. Do you have footage? Rebecca stepped forward from the door, phone in hand. The porch camera caught it all. They watched in silence. The video showed Ava drawing, Echo resting, Benji approaching. The move at his hand coming from his hoodie, not open, not empty, but gripping the hilt of a small blade. The moment he leaned forward, the screen blurred in a flurry of fur and panic. Echo's lunge was precise, not savage, a strike of protection, not hunger. Martinez exhaled. Jesus, that changes things. But the damage was already done. The footage didn't erase the report, didn't undo the boy's stitched-up arm or the headlines already buzzing through the town. Wildcat attacks local teen. Within hours, the video was posted online. Ava's face blurred, Echo's eyes frozen mid-lunge. The public split in two. Some called Echo a hero, others wanted it euthanized. Until the department can make a final ruling, Martinez said the next morning. I have to take it in. Ava whispered. You can't? I don't have a choice, Martinez replied, his tone weary. It's protocol. Jamal stood between them, fists clenched. At least let us say goodbye. Kano barked once, loud, clear, the kind of bark that made every living thing pause. Echo didn't flinch. It turned slowly and walked toward the waiting truck on its own. Echo sobbed. Kano followed it to the end of the drive, then sat down. Watching, waiting, not moving an inch as the truck pulled away and the dust rose behind it, like smoke from a fire no one could put out. The iron cage clanged shut with a finality that echoed through Jamal's ribs like a hammer striking bone. Echo didn't fight when they led it into the crate, didn't hiss, didn't growl, didn't even turn back to Ava when the latch locked. It simply sat down inside the steel box, its golden eyes wide but still, as if understanding that resistance would only make the goodbye worse. Ranger Martinez avoided everyone's eyes as he gave a quiet nod to his partner and climbed into the driver's seat of the white pickup. The cage was bolted in the truck bed, covered with a tarp that flapped slightly in the wind, the tailgate left down just long enough for Echo's face to be visible. Ava stood on the porch, silent, her arms crossed tightly around her chest, her lower lip trembling, but her face determined not to cry again. She had already broken once when the ranger lifted Echo inside, and the cub looked back at her through the slats of the cage just once, just long enough to meet her blind eyes with something wordless, something that felt like trust. Jamal rested a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't react. Beside them, Nash sat like a statue, his tail still, his old eyes blank with confusion. Zeke paced, back and forth, his claws scratched the porch boards in short, nervous bursts, his nose twitching violently as he sniffed the air as if hoping to find Echo's scent still lingering. When the engine started, Zeke froze. The truck began rolling slowly down the gravel road. tires crunching the stones like teeth grinding in the dark. Suddenly Zeke bolted. He jumped from the porch and tore across the yard, his body a blur of brown and black fur, legs pumping with reckless speed. "Zeke!" Jamal shouted, already moving. But the shepherd didn't stop. He didn't hear, or maybe he didn't care. He raced after the truck, barking with wild, choked urgency. The truck reached the end of the drive and turned onto the main road just as Zeke reached the edge. And then came the car. A red sedan, heading downhill too fast, horn blaring too late. Zeke crossed the road in a single bound, the car missing him by no more than a heartbeat. Tires screeched, rubber burned, and the sedan veered off slightly before skidding to a stop. The driver jumped out, swearing, but Zeke had already reached the tailgate of the pickup. He stood there, panting, paws spread wide, and let out a single high-pitched bark, pleading. From inside the crate, Echo shifted. For a moment, just a moment, the two creatures locked eyes again through the tarp's frayed edge. One inside a box, one on the edge of pavement, both framed by panic and desperation. Then the truck drove away. Zeke stood there long after it disappeared around the curve, his chest rising and falling with uneven gasps. Jamal finally caught up, dropping to his knees beside the dog, arms wrapping around his. "You could have been killed," he muttered, more to himself than to the animal. Zeke didn't resist, didn't move. He just stared down the empty road, as if waiting for the sound of tires to reverse direction. That night, the house was quieter than death. Dinner sat untouched on the stove. Ava lay in bed, awake but motionless, her arms wrapped around a pillow used to curl beside. Jamal sat on the porch, watching the moon rise above the ridge. The wind had died, and the trees stood still, their silhouettes sharp against the stars. Nash snored gently from the rug, but Zeke remained by the door, still listening. Kano hadn't moved since sundown. He lay just beyond the porch, facing the hills, his massive frame silhouetted in the moonlight like a statue carved from shadow. Jamal noticed something strange, then Kano's ears were up, his tail stiff, his head raised toward the wind. Jamal set down his cup. "You is it, boy?" he whispered, and then Kano lifted his muzzle and let out a sound Jamal hadn't heard in over a decade. A long, deep, mournful howl. Not a bark, not a growl, a cry. It rose into the sky with aching clarity, vibrating through the air like grief-given voice, like something ancient being remembered. The notes stretched and bent, low at first, then rising, holding, wavering as if it came from the marrow instead of the throat. Zeke responded with a soft whine, crawling forward slowly, inch by inch, until he was beside Kano, resting his chin against the older dog's shoulder. Inside the house, Ava sat up, her face turned toward the sound, her eyes fluttering closed as the howl filled her chest with something too big to name. Jamal stepped off the porch and sat down beside Kano, cross-legged in the dark hills where the sound drifted toward. "You miss him too," he murmured. Kanata didn't answer, but Jamal didn't need one. The howl continued. It was not loud, but it was vast. And when it finally faded, silence returned, not empty, but expectant, like something had been summoned from far beyond the hills. And the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for a response. 3 days passed. 3 days without the sound of claws on the porch, without the sharp swish of a feline tail flicking Ava's wrist as she held out bits of jerky in the early morning sun. The air had shifted inside the river's home, not in temperature, but in texture, like grief was something you could touch, something that crept under the doorframe and sat at your table whether you invited it or not. Ava hadn't left her room. She spoke less, ate little, and the silence in her space was not peaceful but loaded, like static waiting to snap. Jamal tried to stay busy, repairs to the fence, reorganizing the barn, chopping firewood even though the stack was already full, but nothing settled the weight in his chest, that sense that something was wrong, not with them but with how Echo had disappeared. It was on the 4th morning that Jamal decided to check the GPS data. The wildlife department had installed a tracker before taking Echo, promising that its movement would be logged through a secure satellite feed. Rebecca had pulled a few strings to get access to the raw data, and the tablet still sat on the kitchen counter, screen smudged with fingerprints and silence since the truck had vanished down the gravel road. He tapped into the program, expecting to see Echo's trail pushing deeper into the state preserve, where they claimed it would be introduced gradually. Instead, he saw something that made his skin crawl. The last location logged was not in the preserve. It wasn't 50 miles away. It wasn't even 5. It was here within 700 meters of their property. He zoomed in, heartbeat thudding. The coordinates pointed to a small patch of forest just beyond the northern ridge, near the old creek bed where no road curved, no official facility existed. And then, nothing. No signal after that. The feed had stopped at 9:37 p.m. on the night Echo was taken. The map blinked frozen, as if daring him to believe it. Jamal stared at the screen, then at the window, where the forest loomed with its usual indifference. "Zeke," he said quietly, and the young shepherd perked up from his spot near the back door. Jamal grabbed his coat, his boots, his flashlight, and his sidearm, not because he expected danger, but because the part of him that had once served overseas still understood that when the quiet feels this wrong, you come prepared. They hiked fast, Zeke leading with nose low, weaving through the underbrush like a thread pulling Jamal forward. The trees here were older, rougher, their branches grown together like arms guarding secrets. The sun filtered through in strips, but the shadows felt longer than they should. After 20 minutes, Zeke stopped. His ears shot forward, his body patch. He sniffed the air, took 3 short steps to the left, then began pawing at a patch of soft dirt just beneath a crooked juniper. Jamal knelt beside him, brushing away loose pine needles. The soil here had been disturbed, barely, like someone had covered it in haste, but not enough to fool a dog's instincts. Zeke growled low, a tremble of breath, then dug harder. Jamal reached forward and moved dirt by hand, heart climbing up his throat. And then he saw it. A flash of red. Plastic, the edge of a collar. He scraped more quickly now, fingers raw, until he unearthed the entire GPS unit, still attached to a torn segment of leather strap. Blood. Dried, dark, crusted along the edge of the break. "No," Jamal whispered. "But not no." Zeke whined sharply beside him, nosing the collar, then stepping back as if the scent offended him. Jamal held the device in shaking hands, staring at the jagged tear along the clasp, the unmistakable smear of something Echo should never have left behind. There were no paw prints, no other tracks, just the shallow grave of a signal and the silence of the woods pressing in like accusation. He looked around, eyes scanning tree lines, branches, broken twigs, but nothing moved. Nothing gave. It wasn't wildlife, it wasn't nature, it was man. This wasn't relocation. This wasn't observation. Someone had taken Echo out here and buried the collar like a dead body, like evidence. "They never took him to the preserve," Jamal muttered, standing slowly, clutching the broken tracker like a piece of Echo himself. Zeke nudged his hand once, soft and low, and looked up as if to say, "Now what?" The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched farther, but Jamal didn't move. Not yet. Not until his mind stopped spinning, until he could hear the wind again instead of his own pulse roaring in his ears. The scent of earth was thick, cloying, pressed tight against his lungs like wet cloth smothering breath. Echo's mouth filled with grit as he coughed, shallow and ragged, the sound muffled by the weight of packed dirt above his snout. The world was black, not just in darkness but in absence, as though light itself had been stripped away. He couldn't see, not shapes, not motion, not even the vague shadows animals knew in pitch night. But his other senses screamed, the press of soil against every inch of fur, the throb in his head from a blow he could no longer recall, the acidic taste of panic rising behind sharp teeth. Something had happened. He remembered the cold of the cage, the shaking of the truck bed, the hum of tires, then the pain brief, blinding, and the sudden plunge into silence. The sharp smell of engine oil, glove, then nothing, until now, until dirt. He was under it, buried alive. Panic spiked and took shape in motion. His front paws, still trembling but not broken, clawed forward. The soil was shallow, loose enough for the air to seep through in strands, and that was his advantage. He clawed once, then again, each movement sending sharp jolts through his shoulders, but he didn't stop. Instinct didn't let him. His body moved before thought returned. Dig, push, twist, pull, and then air. The moment his nose broke the surface, Echo gasped as if reborn. Shaky paw followed, then another, until his head emerged, ears twitching uncontrollably, eyes wide but seeing nothing. The pain at the base of his skull throbbed in waves. He blinked rapidly, but no light came. The world remained dark, blind. Something inside him flinched. Not fear, adaptation. He raised his head and sniffed. The wind carried pine sap, wet bark, cold stone, and underneath it all something familiar. Faint but undeniable. The trace of cedar wood from the porch steps. The warm iron tang of Kano's breath. A wisp of lavender shampoo from Ava's hair. Faded, stretched thin by time and distance. But real. Home. He turned slowly, orienting himself like a compass rediscovering north. His steps were uneven, wobbly, but forward. Each movement deliberate, led by scent, reinforced by memory, calibrated by terrain. The way dogs learned. The way wolves returned to dens buried miles beneath snow. He sniffed again and moved. A stick cracked beneath his paw and he froze. His ears twitched, tilting backward, picking up the rustle of leaves, the shift of squirrel claws on a tree trunk far to the right. No threat. His muscles relaxed slightly, but his pace didn't change. The forest was thicker than he remembered, though that could have been the blindness. He moved like a ghost with a map etched in bone, his body remembering what his eyes could no longer offer. He crossed a shallow stream, its water biting cold and muddied from spring runoff. He paused only to drink, muzzle dipping once, then moved on, trailing the scent of weathered wood and dry hay. The ground rose, then fell again, then curved sharply to the left, a path he remembered by feel alone. The broken stump where Zeke once chased a rabbit, the hollow log where Ava hid bits of dried meat for training games. He passed them all, invisible but vivid inside his mind. Somewhere to the east, a coyote yipped once, then fell silent. Echo didn't respond. His hearing was sharper now, forced into overdrive by the absence of sight. Each sound catalogued, each scent layered into a mosaic he could move through like a second skin. It took hours. His legs burned, his ribs ached. His head throbbed so violently at times he stopped and lay still, trembling, waiting for the pain to retreat enough to stand again. But the pull of scent, of memory, never dulled. It was Ava's voice that anchored him, not in reality but in his mind. The way she laughed when he batted her arm, the soft way she whispered his name at night, her fingers brushing behind his ear. He replayed them over and over, like a song with no end. That was what brought him back, not GPS, not instinct, not the wildness that had once taught him to hide, hunt, and survive. Love did. Just before dawn, Echo reached the edge of the gravel road. He paused at the ditch, head tilting as he listened. A car passed far off, too distant to matter. The air here was thick with familiarity. Burned coffee, engine grease, dog fur. Home. He crossed the road, each paw step slow, cautious, his ears scanning for movement, his nose confirming each direction before he turned. The house wasn't far now. He could feel it in the shift of wind, in the scent of Ava's blanket airing out on the porch rail. He climbed the last hill on shaky legs and stopped beneath the fence line, breath ragged, ribs heaving. He could go no farther, not tonight. But he was close, he was alive. He had come back. He lay down, curled his body into the wet grass, and listened. Somewhere beyond the trees, a familiar bark echoed faintly. It was Zeke, restless. And further still, the low, steady growl of Kano on patrol. Echo's ears twitched. He let the sounds wash over him like warmth, and rested his head on his paws. He was home. He had found the way without eyes, without GPS, without help. He had clawed his way out of a grave with nothing but scent, memory, and the echo of a girl's voice in the dark. The morning after Echo's return was marked not by celebration but by disbelief, a silence too heavy to break. Jamal found him just after sunrise, curled against the side fence, barely breathing but alive, his coat matted with dried blood and mud, his eyes unfocused and glazed. Ava heard the stir first, a flicker in the air she couldn't name, but felt, and came out to the porch barefoot in her nightgown, calling softly into the wind. "Echo," she whispered, and Jamal, cradling the battered Bobcat in his arms, answered without words by simply stepping forward into the light. The days that followed blurred. Rebecca examined Echo and confirmed the trauma mild. Concussion, shallow abrasions, dehydration, and temporary blindness, likely caused by cranial pressure. He was healing, slowly, stubbornly, like he always had, and yet something about the way he flinched when touched, The way he tensed at the sound of diesel engines in the distance told Jamal this wasn't just trauma of the body. Something darker had happened, something Echo hadn't forgotten. One afternoon, while Rebecca administered fluids, Jamal stood in the barn with Ranger Martinez, showing him the broken GPS collar and the patch of soil where he'd found it. Martinez's face darkened. No record of a drop site near your property, no transport log, no official handoff. That collar was meant to stay on until he reached the reserve. Jamal clenched his jaw. Then someone lied? Martinez nodded grimly. He'll start looking into the transfer team. There were 2 names on the manifest. I don't recognize one of them. Used to work as a private tracker in Idaho. Some freelance enforcement types get pulled in when short-staffed. Not all of them are clean. That night, Echo stirred for the first time since his return. He limped through the house in the dark, following sounds only he could decode, pausing at Ava's door just long enough for her hand to reach out in slow. Then he moved again, slower than before, but purposeful. His head turned toward the woods, ears twitching like a radar dish catching static. Somewhere out there, something waited or watched. A week later, news came from Martinez's office. One of the names, Judd Halverston, was flagged. No formal criminal record, but whispers. A hunter turned consultant. Specializes in containment, a euphemism for sanctioned killings when relocation fails. Jamal remembered the man now. Barely. A gruff figure who stayed silent during the transport. Face shadowed beneath a ranger's cap. Eyes too flat, too cold. Echo had recoiled when Halverston approached the crate. Rebecca confirmed it. She'd seen the man reach through the bars during the loading process, pretending to test its aggression. Echo had swiped then, sharp and fast, catching the man's cheek with a clawed jab. Halverston had cursed, bled, and said nothing. But his eyes said everything. That wasn't assessment, that was provocation. That night, Jamal couldn't sleep. Neither could the dogs. Kano paced the porch. Zeke growled at empty corners. Even Nash lifted his head and stared toward the tree line as if waiting for something to emerge. Around midnight, a motion sensor tripped behind the barn. A soft green light blinked on silently near the chicken coop. Jamal, already half-dressed, grabbed the rifle and slipped out the back door, heart thudding in practiced beats. He didn't move fast. He moved right, but alert. They moved together until they reached the stable, and that's when they heard it. The faint creak of metal against wood. A gate latch tampered with, soft cursing under breath. Jamal glanced at Echo, who had stopped, ears flat, tail rigid. Then came a sound, soft at first, then more urgent, the low, coordinated growl of 3 dogs. Kano, Zeke, Nash. They weren't in the house anymore. They had flanked the trap. Jamal crouched behind the outer fence, eyes locked on the silhouette moving toward the barn door. The man wore camo gear, boots softened with mud, gloves tucked into a coat that looked government-issued but too clean to be real. In his hand, a silenced pistol. He wasn't here to scare, he was here to finish. But he wasn't alone anymore. Echo slipped forward, low to the ground, vanishing into the side shadows of the paddock. Jamal exhaled slowly and tapped his radio mic, whispering into it. Now. Sirens wouldn't come from town. They were staged nearby, per Martinez's arrangement. But Echo didn't wait for backup. He moved first. A sharp snarl erupted from the dark as Echo burst from the hay pile and lunged not to maul but to herd. His claws swiped just inches from Halverston's arm, causing the man to stumble backward, gun swinging wide. He turned to fire, but by then Kano had leapt the trough behind him, Zeke on his right, Nash swerved. 3 dogs, silent now, deadly in their precision, pushed him backward step by step toward the stable. Echo led him, each motion calculated, herding, not attacking, guiding him like a sheep toward the gate. Halverston realized too late, as he backed through the barn's rear entrance, gun shaking, eyes wild. Jamal stepped forward from the tack room, shotgun raised. "Drop it!" Halverston froze. Then Ava's voice came, quiet but clear from the porch where she now stood wrapped in her blanket. "He's not afraid of you anymore." Police lights bloomed over the ridge. Echo stood still at the center of the barn, eyes glowing faintly under the stable light. His body blocked the door. His posture held the room. The hunter was now the hunted. After the failed attempt on Echo's life and Halverston's arrest, The property entered a strange, uneasy peace. It wasn't the relief Jamal had expected, the kind that settles into bones when danger has passed. It was quieter, yes, but charged, like the air before lightning. Echo recovered steadily, vision returning slowly over the course of several days, eyes adjusting from milky blur to focused alertness. The first time he saw Ava again clearly, he blinked, tilted his head, and walked toward her with the careful steps of something relearning what it meant to see and to trust. She had burst into tears, hugging him too tightly, and Echo had allowed it, resting his chin on her shoulder as if it was his way of saying, "I remember." But even as he returned physically, something inside Echo had shifted. He no longer lingered indoors after dusk. At first, Jamal thought it was temporary. Maybe Echo needed space. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe the scent of Halverston still clung to the walls. But even after the barn was scrubbed, the porch cleaned, the gear replaced, Echo continued his new ritual. Every evening, just after the last glow of sunlight touched the treetops, he padded silently to the old stable, leapt onto the roof with a grace neither canine nor feline, and perched. From that height he could see everything: the rolling fence lines, the trail into the woods, the gravel road where the truck had disappeared, and the silhouette of the house behind him. He didn't move once up there. He didn't sleep. He watched every night, like a sentry or a sentinel posted between two worlds. Jamal tried coaxing him back in a few times. So did Ava. They left blankets near the fireplace, raw meat in the ceramic dish he once ate from. Nothing worked. Echo returned only at dawn, walking through the door just long enough to press his forehead against Ava's knee, before slipping back out like mist. Zeke sometimes joined him, lying beneath the roof, eyes turned upward. Kano watched but never followed. Nash just sighed and went back to sleep. It was as if the pack itself had accepted this strange new hierarchy. Echo was no longer the youngest nor the outsider. He was something in between, something other. One morning, before the frost had lifted and the world still glowed faintly silver, Jamal stepped out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee and stopped mid-step. His breath caught. Across the eastern fence line, just beyond the first ridge of trees, were eyes. Not one, not two, dozens. He squinted. Shapes moved, low to the ground, silent, coordinated. Felines. At least 10, some small and lean with wiry frames, others larger with mottled coats and broad paws. Bobcats, ferals, lynx mixes perhaps, all standing still in a loose arc facing the house. None approached the gate, none made a sound. They waited. Jamal's first instinct was threat. He reached for the gate. The animals didn't stalk, their posture wasn't aggressive. They weren't hunting. They were waiting. Behind him, the door creaked open. Ava stepped outside, still in her pajamas, sensing something even before seeing it. "They're not here to hurt us," she said, quiet but sure. "I can feel it." Jamal looked down at her, then back at the field. Echo appeared seconds later. He moved without hiss, descending from the stable roof like smoke drifting down a slope. He didn't hiss, didn't arch. He walked toward the group without hesitation, body tall, steps slow but direct. When he reached the fence, he stopped. The others stood straighter. One young feral stepped forward, a black tufted thing with torn ears and a limp endless out of fellow's arcali air to the chest. It wasn't challenge. It wasn't threat. It was language. A pause followed. Then one by one the cats bowed, not deeply but subtly, heads lowering by degrees, like instinct responding to something older than fear. Jamal stood frozen, coffee cooling in his hand, watching as Echo turned once, looked back toward the porch, toward Ava, and then toward the pack he had never asked for. He wasn't just a creature anymore. He was a bridge, something the woods had chosen, or maybe something that had chosen both. The cats didn't approach farther. After a few minutes, they turned silently and melted back into the trees, leaving no tracks, no sound, only the faint shift of leaves and the strange gravity of what had just passed. Ava turned her face toward Jamal. "He's not like them," she whispered. But they listened to him. Jamal exhaled slowly, unsure whether to feel awe or fear or something else entirely. "Yeah," he said, "because he's both." That evening, Echo did not go to the roof immediately. He stayed near Ava until the last light dipped. Then, with one final glance toward the woods, He ascended to his post, tail curled around his feet, eyes watching both the forest and the farmhouse, as if waiting for a sign from one or a warning from the other. It began quietly, as many things do in spring, without a signal, without warning. Just the subtle change of scent in the air, the snow pulling back to reveal paths long buried beneath white. Echo remained distant, perched on the stable roof most nights, but each dawn he lingered a little longer, drawing closer to the house, the porch, and Ava, as if the balance between his two worlds was shifting once more. The pack had accepted the new order without resistance. Zeke followed Echo as if he were a lieutenant now, and Nash, lower with age, greeted him each morning with a respectful blink and soft tail thump. But it was Kano who changed most. He no longer patrolled. His joints stiffened with each cold morning, his steps more deliberate, measured, slower. He spent more time lying near Jamal's feet than moving across the yard, his eyes watching from behind heavy lids as Echo took the routes he once did. One morning, as the sun broke in gold streaks over the treetops, Ava emerged from the house wearing her walking shoes, a long stick in hand and her coat zipped all the way up. Her expression was unreadable, but her steps were steady as she moved to the edge of the porch. Echo met her there, waiting without command. Jamal stood in the kitchen, watching from the window, the mug in his hand forgotten, barely breathing. She hadn't stepped off the porch since the incident 3 years ago, not beyond the yard, not into the trees. The forest had frightened her more than darkness ever did. But today her chin was high. She whispered something only Echo could hear, and he turned, walking just ahead, ears flicking back occasionally to ensure she followed. Together they crossed the yard. The grass was damp but firm, the path packed from years of pause. Echo led with intention, not just as a guide but as a guardian, retracing a path Kano had once taken every morning down past the split birch tree, through the notch between two boulders, into the shallow glade where deer sometimes gathered at dusk. Echo led carefully, using the stick to feel the edges of the trail, but it was Echo's presence that kept her upright, confident. He moved slowly when she faltered, paused when she paused, resumed when her breath steadied. At one point she reached out and touched his back gently, fingers trailing along the thick fur between his shoulder blades. She smiled. Jamal stepped out to the porch and watched them disappear into the trees. The forest had once felt like the end of something, the end of safety, the end of clarity. But today it looked like the beginning. They returned an hour later, sun higher now, Ava's cheeks pink with cold and victory. Her hands still steady. Echo moved beside her, posture relaxed, tail swaying slightly, like a dog after a successful mission. That afternoon, Jamal brought out 2 chairs and sat with Kano under the old elm, the dogs breathing heavy but peaceful. Ava curled onto the blanket beside them, and Echo lay down across her lap, his body fitting now with the ease of years. His head rested just beneath her chin. Her fingers brushed his ears in long, slow strokes, murmuring words that were less conversation than lullaby. The light changed slowly, gold fading to amber, sky painted with long lines of orange and rose. Jamal looked down as Kano shifted, the old shepherd resting his head on Jamal's boot, eyes half closed, sighing in that deep, soulful way dogs do when everything is exactly where it should be. Echo lifted his head once, gaze scanning the horizon. The trees swayed gently. Nothing moved within. He closed his eyes, not in vigilance but in rest. For the first time, truly, he belonged to both places. He no longer needed the roof to divide wild from tame, no longer watched the border as if it were a line drawn in sand. The border had dissolved. He was not a creature pretending to choose. He was something in between. Not a contradiction, but a bridge. The forest had not taken him, and the home had not tamed him. They had both claimed him in equal parts. Ava tilted her head and whispered, "You brought me back." Echo didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the blanket. Jamal looked out across the field, his heart quiet, his mind still. The world didn't need to understand the world didn't need to classify or permit or label. The world had already tried and failed. Family was not a matter of species or blood. It was the place where fear ended and trust began, where love didn't ask for explanation. From the top rail of the fence, a dove called out into the dusk. From the trees beyond, no predators came. No sounds of danger echoed back, only the hush of wind through leaves and the slow breathing of 5 beings lying closer still, until the line between them ceased to matter. And as the last sliver of sun dipped below the ridge, Echo opened his eyes once more, blinked toward the darkening woods, and saw not a place to run, but a place to return to if ever called. Then he rested his head in Ava's lap again, eyes flickering closed beneath the glow of the final light, and knew that he was not caught between 2 worlds anymore. He was home. If this story moved you, take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. What part of Echo's journey hit you the hardest? Was it the moment he clawed his way back home? Or the final afternoon under the sun with Ava? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you